The desert night was thick with silence when the carriage wheels screeched to a halt. A bride, dressed in white lace that shimmered beneath the moonlight, clutched her chest as masked riders emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hidden, their voices sharp, and before she could cry out, rough hands pulled her from the wooden seat and dragged her into the darkness. The echo of horses' hooves swallowed her screams, leaving the trail empty as if she had never been there at all. In the Wild West, where danger lurked in every canyon, her abduction was not a crime of chance. It was a message. Hours passed as she was bound and carried across the barren plains, her veil torn, her heart pounding with questions that clawed at her soul. Who would dare take her on the eve of a new life? Was it bandits hungry for ransom, or enemies seeking to strike her family through her? The firelight of her captors flickered against her face, their silence crueler than any threat. Alone beneath the endless sky, she realized her fate was not just stolen. It was being rewritten by hands she could not yet see. As the night deepened, the cold wrapped around her like chains, yet her spirit did not break. She replayed the last hours before the abduction, the vows not yet spoken, the promises of love, the laughter of guests awaiting her arrival. Each memory was a knife twisting deeper, fueling the dread that perhaps those she trusted had betrayed her. For in the West, betrayal was often closer than a stranger's gun. The question was not only who had taken her, but why. The riders said nothing, only guiding their horses through jagged terrain until the stars dimmed and the first hues of dawn painted the sky. Exhausted and trembling, the bride prepared herself for death, for ransom, for anything but the truth that awaited her. Her mind clung to hope, whispering that perhaps her groom would come, that perhaps this nightmare would break with the morning sun. But dawn, in the West, was never merciful. It revealed not comfort, but the harsh light of reality. And when the sun rose, spilling gold across the horizon, the veil of mystery was ripped away. She turned her eyes to the man who stepped from the shadows, his face no longer hidden, his identity striking her with the force of a bullet. The crime was not the work of faceless outlaws, but of someone whose name she knew, whose presence shattered every certainty she had carried into that night. The bride's abduction was not a robbery, it was a reckoning. The moment her eyes met his face in the pale glow of dawn, the bride's breath caught in her throat. It was not a stranger, not an outlaw with nothing to lose, but a man whose presence had shaped her life in silence. He stood before her without a mask now, his eyes burning with something darker than anger, a hunger for justice twisted into vengeance. This was no random act of banditry. It was personal, and the realization sank into her chest like cold iron. He was once a friend of her family, a ranch hand who had worked their lands with loyalty and sweat. Years ago, he had disappeared after a bitter feud with her father, vanishing into the desert with nothing but rumors trailing behind him. And now, on the day of her wedding, he had returned not as an ally, but as her captor. His voice, low and steady, carried a venom that revealed years of wounds never healed. He claimed her family had taken everything from him, his home, his pride, even his chance at love. The bride trembled, torn between disbelief and dread. She had heard whispers of that feud, but never the truth. As a child, she had seen him as a figure of strength, a man who laughed easily, whose presence carried warmth. To see him now, hardened by loss and betrayal, was to see how the West carved men into stone when justice failed them. And though she longed to believe he would not harm her, the steel in his gaze left no room for mercy. Her mind raced with questions, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was this about ransom, or was she herself the prize? She remembered her father's pride, her groom's ambition, and wondered how much they had hidden from her. The man before her was not a faceless villain. He was a ghost of her past, carrying the weight of secrets she had never been told. And in that revelation lay a deeper terror. Perhaps she had been living in lies all along. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the desert, but it brought no comfort. Bound and helpless, she understood that her abduction was not the beginning of her suffering, but the unveiling of a truth long buried. And as he stared down at her, his words struck with the finality of a gunshot. You were never meant to marry him. You were meant to know who your family truly is. The bride's heart thundered in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a key to a past she had never been allowed to touch. The man's voice grew harsher as he spoke of debts unpaid, of promises broken, of a betrayal that had left him with nothing but rage. He claimed her father had stolen land that was rightfully his, driving him into exile while cloaking the truth in silence. Every sentence painted her family not as the pillars of respect she had believed, but as thieves cloaked in wealth. Tears welled in her eyes, not only from fear but from the cracks spreading through the world she had trusted. Was her father truly the man she thought he was? Or had she been blind to the suffering he had caused? Her captor leaned closer, his face carved by years of hardship, and demanded that she listen, that she carry his truth into the heart of the very family that had abandoned him. In his fury, she saw not just hatred, but the desperation of a man whose story had been erased. The desert stretched endlessly around them, its silence pressing against her as heavily as the ropes binding her wrists. She realized that this journey was no escape. It was a march toward revelation. Every step her horse took, guided by his hand, pulled her further from the life she had known and deeper into a web of secrets. She was not only a bride robbed of her wedding day. She was an unwilling witness to the sins of generations. Her mind returned to her groom, waiting in confusion and anger for a bride who never arrived. What would he think of her absence? Would he come searching for her? Or would he see this as confirmation of doubts he had never spoken aloud? She wondered if he too carried knowledge of the feud, if her marriage itself had been a way to bury the past. The thought pierced her deeper than fear, that she had been used not for love, but as a pawn in a game older than herself. As the sun began its climb to midday, the man reined in his horse atop a ridge, the town far behind them, the desert yawning ahead. His voice carried over the wind, filled with both bitterness and resolve. By the time you return, you will no longer be their daughter, nor his bride. You will be the one who knows the truth. And with those words, she understood that her journey had only just begun. The trail stretched endlessly before them, each mile carrying her deeper into a silence broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves. The bride's body ached from the ropes that bound her, yet her mind was too restless for pain. She could not escape the storm of questions swirling inside her. What truth could be so dangerous that it had been hidden her entire life? And why reveal it now, on the day when her new life was meant to begin? The desert wind whipped against her face, as though urging her to face what she had long ignored. Her captor rode beside her, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the horizon like a man always expecting betrayal. In the flicker of dawn, she glimpsed the years carved into his features, the scars of exile, the weight of battles fought alone, the bitterness of promises broken. He was not the reckless outlaw she had once feared. He was something more haunting. He was a man forged by injustice, carrying wounds deeper than the desert sands. And she realized, with a chill in her chest, that he believed her abduction was not a crime, but an act of justice. As the hours passed, fragments of his story spilled out like sparks from a fire. He spoke of land taken by force, of cattle driven away under false claims, of nights spent wandering with nothing but fury to guide him. His voice cracked not with weakness, but with the weight of memory, each word stabbing into her carefully woven understanding of her family's honor. She wanted to deny it, to cry out that her father was not capable of such cruelty. But the conviction in his eyes left no room for dismissal. The bride's thoughts turned to her mother, the woman who had raised her with tenderness, yet never spoke of the feud that scarred their past. Had her mother known the truth and chosen silence? Had she been protecting her child, or preserving her husband's pride? The bride's heart tightened as she wondered if love itself had been a veil, hiding the ugly truths beneath. For the first time in her life, she felt like a stranger in her own story. By the time the sun burned directly overhead, she no longer felt like a mere captive. She was a vessel of revelation she had not asked for, burdened with truths that could not be unseen. Her captor turned to her, his voice low, as if sealing her fate with a single sentence. Your father built his empire on ashes, and now you will carry the weight of those bones. The night brought little rest. They camped beneath a jagged cliff where shadows twisted like specters, the fire crackling weakly against the cold. The bride sat across from him, her wrists still bound, but her spirit restless. She studied the man who had stolen her freedom, searching for cracks in his resolve. Yet instead of cruelty, she saw something more unsettling, pain that had festered into obsession. He was not merely avenging his past. He was forcing her to inherit it. She asked him, her voice trembling yet steady, why she had been chosen. If his anger was with her father, why not confront him directly? His answer chilled her blood. Because he fears nothing but truth. And truth from my lips is worthless. But from yours, it will cut deeper than any bullet. In that moment, she understood the full scope of her role. She was not just a hostage. She was a weapon, a living blade sharpened against her own blood. The bride stared into the fire, her mind spinning. Could she become the vessel of such a revelation? Could she walk into her father's house and tear it down with her words? She thought of her groom, waiting with worry and rage, unaware that the woman he loved was being carved into something unrecognizable by the desert night. The fire's glow reflected in her eyes, and she realized she no longer feared death. What terrified her was the life that awaited her once she carried this truth back home. Her captor's voice softened as the flames dimmed. He spoke of the woman he once loved, a woman denied to him because of her family's ambition. His eyes grew distant, his tone tinged with grief, and the bride suddenly understood. His war was not only with her father. It was with the past, with love lost, with a life that might have been. In his pain, she glimpsed the twisted root of everything. He had once been a man of hope, now turned into a man of vengeance. As the stars wheeled overhead, she closed her eyes and felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her. The West was merciless to those who carried secrets, and now she carried one that could topple empires. Whether she wished it or not, her life had been severed from innocence. At dawn, she would no longer be only a bride. She would be the bearer of a truth that could either shatter her family or consume her entire world. When dawn returned, the desert looked different to her eyes. The horizon no longer promised freedom, but reckoning. She rode with her captor through narrow canyons where echoes carried like whispers of the dead. Every turn of the trail pressed her closer to a fate she had not chosen, yet could not escape. The bride, once dressed for vows of love, now bore the silent weight of becoming judge and witness in a conflict older than herself. Her captor spoke little, but when he did, his words dug like spurs into her chest. He told her of nights when hunger hollowed him, when the wind carried only the laughter of the man who had stolen his land. He reminded her that while she lived in silk, he had bled in shadows. His bitterness was raw, but beneath it pulsed a longing she could not ignore, a longing not just for revenge, but for recognition. He wanted the world to remember he had existed, and that his pain was not born of lies. The bride listened, her silence heavy with conflict. A part of her wanted to hate him, to dismiss his stories as madness. But another part, the part that remembered his laughter when she was a child, recognized truth in his grief. She began to see her father's silence in a new light, not as strength, but as concealment. And that thought shook her, because it meant her own life had been built on foundations of deceit. By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked the river valley, where cattle grazed on land stretching as far as the eye could see. The captor gestured to it, his hand trembling with rage and sorrow. "This was mine," he said, voice cracking, "and they stole it, piece by piece, until nothing remained." The bride stared at the green fields, the ranch houses dotting the plain, and felt her stomach twist. If his words were true, then her entire childhood had been cradled in the theft of another man's dream. She could no longer see herself as simply a victim. She was the living proof of two stories colliding, one of privilege, the other of dispossession. The desert sun blazed overhead, merciless in its light, as though forcing her to look at both sides of the truth. And in that glare, she realized that whatever happened next, she would not leave this journey unchanged. The second night in captivity brought a silence heavier than the first. The fire between them flickered weakly, its smoke curling into the star-strewn sky. The bride sat in stillness, her veil long gone, her dress torn, her innocence stripped away by revelations too sharp to ignore. Across from her, the man who had stolen her freedom sharpened his knife absent-mindedly, his gaze distant, haunted by memories. Yet the longer she studied him, the less he looked like a monster. He looked like a man eaten alive by the past. She dared to ask what had broken him most: the land, the betrayal, or the woman he had once loved. His hand stilled on the blade, his jaw tightening. Finally, he admitted it was not the land that had destroyed him, but love denied by greed. He told her of nights when he dreamed of building a home with her mother, only to watch it slip away when her father's ambition burned every bridge. His voice carried no softness, yet in it she heard the ache of a man who had loved too deeply to ever recover. The bride's heart twisted. For years she had idolized her father as a man of honor, a protector. But now she saw him through another lens, as a man capable of cruelty, of tearing apart lives for power. Could both truths exist together? Could her father be both the man who raised her and the man who ruined another? The questions churned like fire inside her, and no answer brought peace. The night wind swept cold across the camp, but inside she felt only heat, the heat of anger, of betrayal, of awakening. She realized she had been stolen long before this abduction. She had been stolen from the truth of her own story, raised in a house where silence was as thick as walls. And now, in the company of the man she should have feared, she felt closer to honesty than she ever had beneath her father's roof. As the flames dimmed and shadows deepened, her captor spoke one final sentence before sleep claimed him. At sunrise, you will choose. Carry their lies, or carry my truth. The bride lay awake, staring at the stars, knowing that either path would tear her life apart. And yet, for the first time, she understood the power she held, not as a victim, but as the bearer of a truth that could either heal or destroy everything she had ever known. The sunrise painted the desert in hues of fire and gold, but for the bride, it carried no warmth. She rose with trembling hands, her captor's words echoing in her chest. Carry their lies, or carry my truth. Her heart beat like a drum as she mounted the horse he offered her, no longer bound, but not free either. Freedom, she realized, was not the absence of ropes, it was the weight of choice, and that burden pressed heavier than chains. They rode silently toward a small, forgotten settlement on the edge of the valley. The people there were worn by hardship, their faces weathered like the land itself. Yet when they saw her captor, their eyes lit with recognition, not fear. They greeted him as one of their own, a man wronged, a man cast out, but not forgotten. The bride felt her stomach knot. This was no outlaw's den. It was a community that bore witness to his story, people who had lived the fallout of her father's deeds. An old woman stepped forward, her gaze piercing as she studied the bride. So, she said, the daughter of the thief finally stands on our ground. The words cut like glass, but they carried no malice, only truth. The bride flushed with shame, for in their eyes she was not a bride adorned in lace and hope. She was the child of a man who had left ruin in his wake. In that moment, she saw how far-reaching betrayal could be. It was not just one man's wound, but the wound of an entire people. Her captor demanded she listen to their stories, and she did. Each voice layered another piece of the past, painting her father not as the man of honor she had loved, but as a figure who had risen by stepping on the backs of others. She wanted to scream, to deny it all, but the faces around her carried scars too deep to fabricate. Truth, she realized, was not just written in letters, it was carved into lives. By the time the sun stood high, her spirit was fractured. She had entered the desert as a bride stolen from her wedding, but now she stood as a woman stolen from her illusions. The West had a way of stripping away comfort, leaving only bone and truth. And standing there among the broken, yet unyielding, she realized that she would never again see her father's ranch in the same light. That evening, when the sky burned crimson, her captor spoke again, his voice quieter, steadier. He told her she had been brought here not just to punish her father, but to witness the truth he could no longer deny. She was the bridge between two worlds, the comfort of lies and the agony of honesty. And though she felt shattered, she began to understand why he had chosen her. Only she carried the power to confront her father in a way that could not be silenced. The bride stared into the flames, her heart torn between rage and sorrow. Could she face her father and demand the truth? Could she stand in her groom's eyes and admit that the life they dreamed of had been built on theft? The questions suffocated her, but one answer rang clear. Silence would no longer protect her. Silence was the very weapon that had allowed betrayal to flourish. As night deepened, her captor confessed something unexpected. He had never intended to kill her. She was not a hostage to be ransomed or a pawn to be broken. She was his last chance at justice, the living voice he could never be. The admission struck her like a blow, for it meant her journey was not only about survival, but about transformation. She was no longer just a bride stolen from a road. She was a witness chosen to carry a fire that could not be extinguished. The stars glittered above them, endless and indifferent, as if mocking the weight of human struggles. Yet the bride felt a strange resolve take root within her. She was afraid, yes, but beneath that fear pulsed something stronger, defiance. Her father's wealth, her groom's love, even her captor's vengeance, all of it had been shaped by men's choices. But now, for the first time, the power of choice belonged to her. And as the fire flickered low, casting long shadows across the desert floor, she whispered into the night, "At dawn, I will decide." Her captor heard her words and said nothing, but in the silence between them, the West seemed to hold its breath. For it knew that the choice of one woman could alter the course of many lives, and perhaps carve a new legend into the dust. The final stretch of their journey began before sunrise, the desert still cloaked in darkness. The bride rode ahead this time, her veil gone, her face hardened by sleepless nights and truths she could no longer deny. Behind her, the captor kept a steady pace, watching in silence as she carried herself not as a victim, but as a woman on the edge of revelation. Every hoofbeat drew her closer to the ranch that had raised her, and to the reckoning that awaited within its walls. When they reached the valley, the sprawling ranch loomed in the distance, its fences stretching like skeletal fingers across stolen land. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lanterns flickered in the windows, signs of comfort she had once cherished. But now, those lights felt foreign, even mocking. She no longer saw home. She saw an empire built on suffering. Her heart pounded as she wondered how her father would look at her, with denial, with fury, or with the hollow gaze of a man exposed. The captor reined in his horse at the ridge, his voice steady but weighted with finality. "This is where our paths part," he told her. "You will face him, not me. My truth has already been lived. Yours begins now." His words sank into her bones, leaving her with a choice she had dreaded: to return as the obedient daughter, or to step forward as the bearer of a truth that could tear her family apart. Fear clawed her chest, but so did resolve. She thought of the settlement she had seen, the faces lined with grief, yet unbroken by despair. She thought of the letters, the stories, the pain that had been silenced for too long. And she realized that her silence would make her no different from the father she now questioned. The burden was heavy, but her voice was the only weapon she had, and it was enough. As the sun crested the horizon, casting the ranch in golden light, the bride straightened in her saddle. She was no longer the girl stolen on the road. She was a woman returning with the weight of truth, ready to confront the man who had shaped her world in shadows. And though fear gnawed at her, she knew that once she spoke, nothing in the West would ever be the same. The ranch yard was alive with confusion when she arrived, her torn gown and dust-covered face sending waves of whispers through the gathered workers. Her groom rushed forward, eyes wide with relief, only for his joy to falter when he saw the steel in her gaze. She brushed past him without a word, her eyes fixed on the house where her father waited. Each step across the dirt was heavier than the last, but the fire inside her kept her moving. Her father stood on the porch, flanked by men loyal to him, his jaw clenched in a mask of anger and false control. He demanded to know where she had been, who had taken her, but his voice cracked with unease. She met his eyes with a calm fierceness he had never seen before, and in front of all who watched, she spoke the words he had long buried: the truth of the land, the betrayal of the past, the faces of those he had broken to build his empire. Gasps rippled through the crowd as her voice carried, steady and unrelenting. Her groom's face drained of color. The workers exchanged fearful glances, and even her father's men shifted uneasily. Each sentence fell like a hammer, shattering the illusion of honor he had maintained for so long. He tried to shout her down, but her voice rose above his, fueled by years of silence, finally undone. For a moment, the ranch fell into stillness. Her father's eyes burned with fury, yet behind them flickered something he could not conceal: fear. Not fear of his daughter, but of the truth that no bullet could kill, no money could bury. She had become the witness he could not silence, the voice he could not control. And in that stillness, the people saw not just a bride or a daughter, but a woman who carried the power to end a legacy of lies. The desert wind swept across the yard, carrying her final words into the open air. This land, this life, this empire, it is not built on pride, but on theft. And the truth will not die with me. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The rancher's empire had begun to crumble, not by force of arms, but by the unyielding courage of a woman who had once been his child. And in the Wild West, where legends were carved in dust and blood, hers had just begun. The story of the bride's abduction did not end with her return. In truth, it had only begun. What was stolen from her on that lonely road was not merely her freedom, but her innocence. She left her father's ranch no longer blind to the shadows cast by wealth and pride. She had faced betrayal, uncovered buried sins, and stood against the silence that had shaped her life. In doing so, she became more than a daughter or a bride. She became a voice that refused to be silenced. Her father's empire, once untouchable, now trembled under the weight of truth. The people who had lived in fear began to see that even the strongest walls of deception crumble when confronted by courage. The West had taught her one brutal lesson: power built on lies is never as enduring as a single soul brave enough to speak. And her defiance had lit a fire that would continue to burn long after the dust settled. Yet, the heart of her story is not vengeance, but transformation. She learned that love without truth is fragile, that silence feeds injustice, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in weapons, but in words. Her journey was a reminder that the road to freedom often begins in the darkest night, and that dawn reveals not comfort, but clarity. Through pain and fear, she found the strength to carry a truth larger than herself. And so, her legacy was carved into the land, not as a victim who was taken, but as a woman who chose to stand. Her voice joined the chorus of legends told around fires and saloons, a reminder to every heart that listened. No matter how deep the lies, no matter how strong the chains, truth always finds its way to the light. In the unforgiving soil of the West, she had proven that even one voice can shift the course of destiny. If this story moved you, let its echo live on through your voice as well. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others feel the weight of this journey by giving your support with a like, and keep these tales of courage alive by subscribing to the channel. Just as her truth could not be buried, your engagement ensures that stories like this will continue to rise, carrying lessons and emotions far beyond the horizon.